Welcome to Martha Family Secret Stories. They say the best revenge is living well. I used to laugh at that saying. I used to think, sure, that sounds nice on a greeting card. But let me tell you something nobody puts on a greeting card. The real best revenge? Is sitting across a dinner table from the people who came to destroy you, watching them smile at you like they've already won, and knowing, deep in your bones, that they never even came close. My name is Robert Colton. And this is my story. Please subscribe and like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way, I can see how far my story has traveled. Because I have a feeling this one is going to reach a lot of people who needed to hear it. Now, before I get into the dinner that changed everything, you need to understand something about me. Something that almost nobody in my daily life actually knows. I drive a 2004 Ford Ranger with a crack in the passenger side mirror that I have been meaning to fix for going on 3 years now. I wear a Casio watch. Not as some rich man's quirk, not ironically, not to seem relatable. I wear it because it tells time, it doesn't need charging, and I have never once needed a watch to tell me who I am. My house sits on a quiet street in Clarksburg, West Virginia. Wednesday mornings you'll find me out front in a flannel shirt and beat-up garden boots, watering my tomato plants, and if you walked past me on that sidewalk, I promise you, you would offer me a coupon before you'd offer me a boardroom seat. That is exactly, precisely, intentionally how I like it. Because for the last 23 years, I have owned and operated Colton Bridge Industries. Manufacturing, logistics, distribution across 16 states. Just under 4,000 employees. Last fiscal year we cleared a number that would make your coffee go cold if I said it out loud. But you wouldn't know it to look at me. And I worked hard to make sure of that. Now, my daughter. My daughter Claire. Where do I even begin with Claire? She has her mother's laugh, which means it fills every room it enters and makes strangers smile without knowing why. She's sharp, she's stubborn in the best possible way, and she has this ability to see the good in people that I spent half her childhood being jealous of because I lost that ability somewhere around age 30 and never fully got it back. Claire did not inherit my love of staying invisible. She walks into rooms and people notice. Always has. Since she was 7 years old and told her entire second grade class about the logistics of running a small business because she'd been listening to my phone calls from the back seat. She was 7. I still don't know whether to be proud or terrified. 3 Thanksgivings ago, Claire brought home a man named Marcus Webb. Now, I have shaken a lot of hands in my life. Closed deals, sized up competitors, sat across from men who were trying to take things from me and smiled the whole time. So when I shook Marcus Webb's hand at my front door that Thanksgiving evening, I want you to understand that I was not operating on instinct alone. I was reading. And what I read was this. Marcus Webb had never been told no. Not in a way that stuck. There was a shine to him, the particular polish of a man the world had been buffing his whole life, doors opening before he reached them, rooms rearranging themselves around him without him ever having to ask. Confident in a way that filled space. Handsome in a way he clearly knew about. But here's the thing. He was also smart. Genuinely smart. And when I put him through our internal vetting process, yes, I ran a background and financial check on my daughter's boyfriend, and no, I am not even a little bit sorry, his instincts were sharp. His numbers were solid. His professional track record was real. So when Claire sat at my kitchen counter one Sunday morning, both hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea, and told me she was serious about this man, I made a decision that I have never made for any hire in 23 years of running a company. I promoted from emotion. I made Marcus Webb the Chief Executive Officer of Colton Bridge Industries. He had absolutely no idea who he was really working for. As far as Marcus knew, he had been headhunted by a prestigious search firm, interviewed by a panel of senior executives, and earned the position on pure merit. Which, to be completely fair to him, he mostly had. I just nudged the door open a little. A small nudge. A father-sized nudge. Claire found out the same night I made the decision. She sat at that same kitchen counter, same chamomile tea, and she stared at me for a long time. Dad. She said it slowly, like she was choosing each letter individually. Dad, this is the plot of a soap opera. I prefer to think of it as strategic family planning, I told her. She gave me the look. Fathers, you know the look. The one that says I love you completely and you are absolutely out of your mind. That look. For 14 months, everything moved the way I'd hoped. Marcus ran the company well. Better than I expected, honestly, and I want to be truthful about that because it both pleased me and irritated me in equal measure. Pleased me because my daughter had better judgment than I'd given her credit for. Irritated me because I wasn't quite ready to admit that yet. And then, one Thursday evening in late March, my phone rang. Marcus, calling with that particular warmth young executives use when they think they're speaking to a harmless older man. Respectful. A little performative around the edges. Robert, he said, I'd love for you to come to dinner this weekend. My parents are in town. They've been wanting to meet you properly for a while. I almost said no. My stomach said no before my mouth could. Something in the specific way he said they've been wanting to meet you sat wrong. Not like a son mentioning his parents. More like a line that had been practiced. But there is a version of me, the version built over 3 decades of hard lessons, that does not run from uncomfortable feelings. That version walks toward them. Slowly. Hands in pockets. Eyes open. Sure, I said. Tell me where. If you are still listening, I need you to stay right here with me because what happened at that dinner table is something I am still, even now, processing the full weight of. Part 2 is where this story truly begins. And I promise you, you are not ready for what Marcus Webb's father had inside that envelope. The restaurant was called Harrington's. The kind of place where the menu has no prices and the waitstaff introduces themselves by first name and holds eye contact the way people do when they've been specifically trained to make you feel important. White tablecloths. Soft lighting. The whole performance. I wore my cleanest flannel shirt. On purpose. Marcus met me at the door, freshly barbered, jacket that probably cost more than my first car. He looked at my shirt. And to his genuine credit, he did not flinch. Not even a flicker. You look great, he said. I look like a man who found parking, I told him. He laughed. I didn't. Not yet. Inside, Gerald and Patricia Webb were already seated. Now. I need you to understand something about first impressions, because this matters to everything that follows. People who are carrying a secret agenda always overcorrect when they first meet you. They are too warm. Too welcoming. The smile arrives before the eyes do. Gerald Webb stood up and shook my hand with both hands. The double grip. The kind that means either you are completely sincere or you are completely calculating. And he said, Robert, we have heard so much about you. Please, sit, like he was welcoming me into his own home instead of a restaurant I could have bought twice over. Patricia touched my arm and said I looked wonderfully comfortable. Wonderfully comfortable. That is the expensive restaurant way of saying she'd seen the flannel and filed me under not a threat. Good. That was exactly where I wanted to be filed. We ordered. We made small talk. Marcus talked about the company carefully, the way he always did around me, keeping the details vague out of what he believed was professional courtesy. Gerald asked about my property in Clarksburg, which Claire had apparently mentioned. I told him I grew tomatoes. He nodded the way people nod when they have already stopped listening. And then. About 40 minutes in. Right between the entree and the moment I was beginning to think maybe my stomach had been wrong about all of this. Gerald Webb reached into the inside pocket of his blazer. He pulled out an envelope. Cream-colored. Thick. The kind of envelope that does not come from a drugstore. He placed it on the table in front of me. Deliberately, gently, the way you place something when you need the other person to understand that what's inside carries weight. He folded his hands. Patricia lifted her wine glass. And Marcus. This is the part one keep returning to, even now. Marcus looked down at his plate. Robert, Gerald said, his voice dropping just enough to signal that we had left small talk behind entirely. There are some things about your past. About your history. That we feel deserve a conversation. I looked at the envelope. I looked at Gerald. I looked at Marcus, who was studying his salmon like it had personally wronged him. And I thought. There it is. 23 years of building. 23 years of silence. 23 years of believing that what happened with Vincent Marsh had stayed buried exactly where I'd left it. I picked up my water glass. Took one slow, quiet sip. Set it back down. Gerald, I said. Before I open that, I think you should know something about me. He smiled. Patient. Confident. The smile of a man who believes he is holding every card at the table. I'm listening, he said. I leaned forward. I never sit down at a table I haven't already flipped. The envelope sat between us like a grenade with the pin already pulled. And nobody at that table, not Gerald, not Patricia, not even Marcus, knew which one of us was already holding the pin. Oh, but stay with me. Stay with me right here. Because I did not open that envelope right away. And that silence. That long, heavy, deliberate silence. That was the first move in a game Gerald Webb had no idea he had already lost. I picked up my fork. Cut into my steak. Chewed slowly. Let the silence stretch across that tablecloth like something alive. Norma shifted in her seat. Gerald's patient smile developed a small fracture in the left corner. Marcus still had not looked up. After what I counted as a very satisfying 45 seconds, I set my fork down, wiped my mouth, and reached for the envelope. Inside were documents. Photocopied but clean. Organized with the careful neatness of someone who had let a lawyer touch them. I did not read every word immediately. I did not need to. Because the moment my eyes landed on the name at the top of the first page, my entire chest went cold and completely calm at the exact same time. Vincent Marsh. And this is where I need to take you back. Back to 1988. Back to a version of me that was 26 years old, broken the specific way that only young men with enormous ambition and absolutely no capital can be broke, and completely certain that the man standing next to me was someone I could trust with my life. His name was Vincent Marsh. We were partners. We had a plan to build something. A small manufacturing outfit in Columbus. Nothing glamorous. Metal parts for industrial equipment. The kind of business that doesn't make headlines but keeps the world running. For 4 years, we built it together. And for 4 years, I ignored every sign that Vincent was not the man I believed him to be. He was skimming. Not dramatically. Not all at once. The way termites work. Quietly, consistently, until the structure is hollow and you don't discover it until you lean on the wrong wall and everything comes down. By 1991, Vincent had siphoned enough from our joint accounts to fund a separate operation. A competitor. Built entirely on the back of clients he had quietly poached using our proprietary contacts and my personal relationships. When I found out, I did not rage. I did not confront him that day or the next day or the day after that. I went very, very quiet. I spent 6 months documenting everything. Every transaction. Every diverted contract. Every forged signature. When the file was thick enough to end him 17 different ways, I sat across from Vincent Marsh in that same small Columbus office where we had shaken hands as partners. And I gave him a choice. Walk away. Dissolve his competing firm. Sign over his remaining stake. Disappear. Or I take everything I have documented to the district attorney's office, and he spends the next decade explaining himself to a jury. Vincent Marsh chose to disappear. I rebuilt alone. And I kept the name. Colton Bridge. The bridge in the name was Vincent's idea, from a conversation we'd had years earlier about connecting industries. I kept it because I built everything that came after on the lesson he taught me, and I never wanted to forget it. What I did not know. What I had absolutely no possible way of knowing. Was that Vincent Marsh had a younger brother. 15 years younger. A boy who was perhaps 10 or 11 years old when all of this happened. A boy who grew up hearing one side of this story from a broken man who never once, not once, admitted what he had actually done. A boy who had been carrying a version of events that was never true. A boy named Gerald. I looked up from the documents. Gerald Webb was watching me with the focused, burning intensity of a man who has been waiting a very, very long time for this exact moment. And somewhere across that table, Patricia was dabbing at her eyes, and Marcus still had not looked up from his plate, and I sat in that restaurant with the full weight of 30 years pressing down on a cream-colored envelope and thought quietly to myself. Oh, Gerald. Ah, Gerald. You have no idea. Hold on. Stay right here with me. Because part 3 is where everything in this story changes direction. Where a man who came to this dinner armed walks out of it empty-handed. And where a son has to look his father in the eye and ask a question he can never take back. Where did you get these? I asked. Quietly. No drama. Just the question. Vincent kept records, Gerald said. His own records. Everything you did to him, Robert. Every threat. Every ultimatum. The way you forced him out of a company he helped build. I nodded slowly. And you've been holding these for how long? Long enough, he said. Vincent passed away 4 years ago. Lung cancer. He died with nothing, Robert. Nothing. Because of what you took from him. And there it was. The grief underneath all the strategy. The real thing hiding behind the envelope and the orchestrated dinner and the rehearsed warmth. And I want to be honest with you right now, because this story deserves honesty. I felt it. A small, quiet ache for the version of events that was real to Gerald Webb. Because he genuinely believed it. He had been carrying it for decades and it was real to him, weeping through every year of his adult life without him even fully knowing it. Gerald, I said carefully. I'm sorry about your brother. I don't want your condolences. His voice was sharp. I know. What do you want? He leaned forward. He had clearly rehearsed this part. I want you to step back from any remaining role you hold at Colton Bridge, he said. I want a formal financial settlement. The number is in the envelope. Paid to my family as restitution for what Vincent lost. And I want it completed quietly, before my son's name becomes attached to whatever comes next. And that was when Marcus finally looked up. I want to describe exactly what I saw on Marcus Webb's face in that moment. Because it matters enormously to everything that comes after. It was not the face of someone who had been part of planning this. It was not the face of a conspirator. It was the face of a man who had just heard something said out loud that he was not fully prepared to hear. There was color rising in his jaw. His eyes moved from his father to me and back again with the particular panic of someone who had been told this was just a dinner and was now sitting in the rubble of that promise. Dad, Marcus started. Marcus, Gerald said. His voice was a closed door. Marcus closed his mouth. I watched that exchange and I filed it. Filed it carefully. How long have you known? I asked Marcus directly. Looking at him, not at Gerald. He opened his mouth. Closed it. Looked at his father. Marcus. I said it softer this time. I'm asking you. Not him. He exhaled. Rubbed the back of his neck. His voice, when it came, was lower than I had ever heard it in 14 months of board meetings and strategy calls. I knew there was history between our families, he said. Dad told me when Claire and I got serious. He said there was a debt that needed settling. And that me being close to you was. He stopped himself. Was what? I said. He didn't answer. Which was its own answer. Patricia chose this moment to place her hand over mine with a warmth so carefully manufactured I nearly checked it for a label. Frank, this doesn't have to be unpleasant, she said softly. We're family now. This is about making things right. I looked at her hand on mine. I looked at her face. I looked at the smile that had been ready and waiting since before I walked through the door of this restaurant. Patricia, I said pleasantly. I need you to hear this next part very clearly. Because here is what you need to understand about a man who has been doing this for 30 years. You do not walk into a room like this empty-handed. Not when your gut spent the entire week before this dinner whispering at you. Not when a name like Vincent Marsh is still somewhere in your past like an unhealed scar. I had made some calls of my own. I reached into my jacket and placed my own envelope on the table. Smaller. White. Completely unremarkable looking. The kind of envelope you wouldn't look at twice. Victor's records are incomplete, I said. Which makes sense. Because a man building a false narrative tends to keep only the pages that support his version. Gerald's eyes dropped to my envelope. What I have here, I continued, are the original bank records from our joint account between 1989 and 1991. The withdrawal patterns. The wire transfers to a shell company registered in Vincent's wife's maiden name. The email correspondence, including 3 separate messages in which Vincent explicitly discussed his plan to replicate our client list and launch a competing business using our infrastructure. I also have a signed affidavit from a man named Dale Pruitt, Vincent's accountant at the time. He is 72 years old, in perfectly good health, and absolutely willing to testify to exactly what he processed on Vincent's instructions. I paused. Gerald's face had changed. The patient confidence was gone. What replaced it was something raw. Something that looked, underneath all the anger, almost like grief. The purest kind. The kind that comes when a story you have been holding up like a shield is taken out of your hands. You destroyed him, he said. His voice had lost its dinner party finish entirely. He destroyed himself, I said. And then he told you a story that let him die feeling like a victim instead of what he actually was. You threatened him. You forced him out. I gave him a choice, I said. The same choice the law would have given him, except with considerably less public humiliation. What he did with that choice was entirely his own. Gerald stood up. Not dramatically. Just the slow rise of a man whose legs had made a decision before his brain caught up. Sit down, Gerald, I said quietly. Please. Because this conversation is not finished. And the part that's left, the part that actually matters, is about your son. And for the first time since I sat down at this table. For the first time all evening. I saw something move across Gerald Webb's face that was not performance or rehearsed confidence or the polished certainty of a man who had been preparing this moment for years. I saw shame. Something is coming in part 4 that I did not expect. Something that changed the way I think about the word trust. And it starts with Marcus Webb asking me a question that I was completely unprepared for. Clayton, I said, and I want you to understand that I chose my tone the way a surgeon chooses an instrument. Wait. Let me call him Marcus again. Forgive me. That is what carrying a story this long does to you. It starts bleeding together. Marcus, I said. I need to tell you something. And I need you to listen to me the way you would listen if I were just Robert. Not your father-in-law. Not some old man in a flannel shirt. Just Robert. He nodded. Barely. But he nodded. I know who you are, I said. I've known since before you walked through my daughter's front door. He frowned. What I'm about to tell you is going to change every single thing you think you understand about your life for the last 14 months. The waiter appeared at the edge of the table. His timing was extraordinary. Can I interest anyone in dessert? He asked brightly. All 4 of us turned to look at him. He backed away slowly. Bless him. Marcus, I continued. The search firm that headhunted you was contracted by me. The board you interviewed with reports to me. The position you have held for the last 14 months, the corner office on the 19th floor, the company car, the salary that I know exactly because I approved every dollar of it, exists inside a company that I own entirely. Have owned for 23 years. The frown on his face deepened. Then stopped. Then his face did something I can only describe as a slow system shutdown. The kind that happens when a mind is handed information that simply does not compute and everything goes quiet while it tries to load. He started. Robert Colton, I said. Founder and sole owner of Colton Bridge Industries. Absolute silence. Gerald had sat back down at some point during this. I hadn't noticed when. He looked like a man watching a building he had spent years constructing fold in on itself, floor by floor, completely quietly, with no drama at all. Why? Marcus said it quietly, and it came out younger than he intended. Stripped of the boardroom finish. Just a man. Just a genuine question. Why would you do that? Patricia made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a dismissal. So this was all some kind of test, she said. No, I said, turning to her with a patience that I want you to understand was completely, genuinely real. This was me being a father. There's a difference. I gave Marcus a moment. Because what I had just handed him was an enormous amount of weight and I am not a cruel man. I wanted him to find his footing before the next part. Because the next part required a decision. And decisions made in free fall are rarely the ones people stand behind later. He ran both hands through his hair. Exhaled through his nose. Looked at the tablecloth for a long time. And then he looked at his father. And I watched something shift in Marcus Webb's eyes that I had not anticipated. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't embarrassment, exactly. It was something colder. Something clarifying. Like the moment a fog lifts and you see the shape of the land you have been walking through all along. How long, he said to Gerald. Quiet. Direct. Gerald said nothing. Dad. Marcus's voice had an edge I had never heard in 14 months of knowing him. How long have you known who Robert was? Gerald straightened his cufflinks. A delay so transparent it was almost painful to watch. I began to suspect when you told me the company name, he finally said. Vincent mentioned Colton to me years ago. I did some research. When I told you the company name, Marcus repeated slowly. Meaning before Claire and I got engaged. I was protecting our family. You positioned me. The words came out flat. Precise. Like items being read from an invoice. You found out who I was working for and you saw an opportunity. You let me fall in love with Claire. You encouraged it. Because you thought I was your way in. Patricia reached for his hand. Sweetheart, your Uncle Vincent deserves. Don't. Marcus pulled his hand back. Don't bring Vincent into this right now. I stayed completely still. Because what was happening across that table had nothing to do with me anymore. It had everything to do with a young man seeing his father clearly, maybe for the first time in his life. And the right thing to do in that moment was absolutely nothing. Gerald tried one more angle. The father angle. The one that surfaces when logic has run out. Everything I did was for this family, he said. Marcus, that man took everything from your uncle, from all of us. You were finally in a position to. To what? Marcus's voice cracked on the word and hardened immediately after. The way young men's voices do when they refuse to let the emotion finish a sentence. Help you extort my father-in-law. Use my wife's family to settle a 30-year grudge over a story that, based on what Robert just put on this table, was never even true. Gerald had no answer for that. I picked up my water glass. Mostly just to give my hands something to do. After a long silence, Marcus turned back to me. His face was composed now. Deliberate. I recognized it. It was the face he wore walking into difficult board meetings, into negotiations that required him to be larger than whatever he was feeling. It was, I realized, with a quiet pride I kept entirely to myself, the face of a chief executive officer. I owe you an apology, he said. You don't, I said. You didn't know. I knew enough to feel that something was wrong about tonight. He said it without flinching. And I came anyway. I sat at this table while my father put that envelope in front of you, and I looked at my plate. He paused. That's not who I want to be. Ah. I looked at him for a long moment. No, I said. It isn't. And the fact that you know that is exactly why you still have a job Monday morning. Something moved across his face. Relief, trying very hard to be dignified about itself. And as for you, I said, turning to Gerald. He lifted his chin. The last posture of a man who has lost and hasn't quite finished pretending. Those documents you brought tonight, I said, nodding at the cream envelope still sitting on the table where he'd left it, are incomplete, misleading, and in the context of what I've placed alongside them, entirely harmless to me. I want you to understand that. I want you to sit with the fact that you came here tonight with what you believed was a weapon. And it turned out to be a photograph of a weapon. Gerald said nothing. His jaw moved but no sound followed. I'm not going to pursue anything legal against you, I said. Not because I couldn't. But because Vincent was your brother. And grief makes people do things the undamaged version of themselves never would. I understand that. I'm genuinely sorry for how he told you that story. I'm sorry you spent years carrying it. Patricia's eyes were full. She was staring at the tablecloth. But I need you to hear this, I said, leaning forward. I'll only say it once. I want you to understand what your son actually married into. Claire is my daughter. As of her 25th birthday 3 months ago, she became a majority shareholder in Colton Bridge Industries. Your son is the CEO of my company. The only reason any of that remains available to him, and through him to your family, is because he just proved to me in the last 10 minutes that he is not you. The silence that followed that sentence was the most valuable silence I have ever sat inside. And it didn't cost me a single dollar. Gerald Webb picked up his linen napkin. Folded it. Placed it beside his plate. The gesture of a man who has nothing left to do with his hands. We should go, he said to Patricia. Quietly. She nodded. Did not look at me. Did not look at Marcus. Simply rose from her chair. Gerald paused at Marcus's shoulder on the way out. The pause of a father who has run out of the right words. Son, he said. Marcus looked up. Later, he said. Not tonight. Later. The distance inside those 2 words could have filled the entire restaurant. Gerald and Patricia Webb walked out. And I watched them go. And I felt nothing dramatic. Just the quiet, settled feeling of something unfinished for 30 years being placed gently on a shelf. Part 5 is the last one. And I need you to stay for it. Because what Marcus said to me after they left, over chocolate lava cake and real coffee, is the part of this story I think about most. Marcus and I sat in silence for a moment. The waiter appeared again. With the confidence of a man who had assessed the temperature of the room and decided the storm had passed. Dessert? He offered. Marcus looked at me. I looked at Marcus. You know what, I said. Yes. What's the chocolate thing? The lava cake, he said. 2 of those, I told him. And coffee. Real coffee. Not the decaf nonsense. He disappeared. Bless that man. Truly. Marcus let out a breath that sounded like it had been waiting since before the appetizers arrived. Robert, he said. Yeah, I need to ask you something. And I need you to be honest with me. Always. He looked me directly in the eye. Do you actually trust me to run the company? Not as Claire's husband. As a CEO. I considered the question the way it deserved to be considered. 6 months ago, I said, you restructured our Midwest distribution network and saved us $4.1 million annually. You did it without being asked. You identified the problem, designed the solution, and presented it to the board before I even knew there was an issue. I paused. So yes. I trust you. He nodded slowly. Processing. But, I added. He looked up. Monday morning, you and I are sitting down together. Not as father-in-law and son-in-law. Not as owner and CEO. Two men. Honest conversation. About what we both know and how we move forward. No more flannel shirt mystery. No more gaps. The corner of his mouth moved. You're really not going to stop wearing the flannel, are you? The flannel is non-negotiable, I said firmly. He laughed. A real one. The first real thing I had heard from him all evening. I think it surprised even him. The lava cakes arrived. We ate them. The chocolate was obscenely good. I made a mental note to tip the waiter generously on the way out because that man had genuinely earned it. I drove home in my 2004 Ford Ranger with the cracked passenger mirror. The city moved past my windows and I let it. I thought about Vincent Marsh. The young man he was before greed found him. I thought about Gerald sitting somewhere across the city tonight with an empty envelope and a story that had holes in it he would have to learn to live with. I thought about Marcus driving home to my daughter, trying to figure out how to explain an evening that had rearranged everything he thought he knew about his own life. And I thought about what it means to build something. Not just a company. A way of moving through the world that means when someone finally comes for you, and someone always eventually comes for you, you are not caught off guard at a dinner table. You are already home. I pulled into my driveway. Sat in the truck for a moment. Looked at my house. Modest. Warm. Lit from inside because Claire had stopped by earlier and never ever remembers to turn off the kitchen light. Aw. That girl. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Told Claire everything. She says you are impossible and she loves you. Also she says the flannel is embarrassing and she's with me on that one. I smiled at my phone in the dark of that truck cab. Typed back. Tell her the flannel built her inheritance. I put the phone in my pocket. Got out. Walked up to my front door. Somewhere across the city, Gerald Webb was sitting with an empty envelope and a story with holes in it. And I was going home to my tomatoes. Now. Before I go. I want to ask you something. Have you ever had someone underestimate you? Have you ever sat across from a person who thought they already knew exactly who you were, exactly what you were worth, exactly how this was all going to go? Tell me in the comments. And if you've dealt with something similar, share your story. You're not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life. Because here is the thing I want to leave you with tonight. Some people build things to prove something. To the world, to their father, to the person who once told them they never would. I built Colton Bridge Industries to protect something. My daughter. My name. The lesson that a 26-year-old kid in Columbus learned the hard way when a man he trusted chose greed over everything. And on a Thursday evening in March, at a restaurant where the menu had no prices and a waiter had the bravery of a small army, everyone at that table finally understood the difference. The flannel shirt. The cracked mirror. The tomatoes. None of it was carelessness. All of it was armor. And that is the story of how I sat across from the people who came to take something from me, let them think they had already won, and went home to water my garden. Good night. And thank you for listening all the way to the end. I meant it when I said I want to know where you're listening from. Drop your city in the comments. I read every single one.